The Great Hall of Nexus Prime stretched for miles in every direction, a monument to power that had stood for 11,000 years. Its walls were made of crystal harvested from dying stars, and its ceiling displayed the live feeds of 1,000,000 conquered worlds, spinning in silent obedience to the Galactic Council ambassador. Elena Vasquez walked through the entrance with her head held high, her boots echoing against the ancient stone floor as 1,000 alien delegates turned their many eyes toward her. She was small compared to most of them. A fragile-looking human woman with gray streaks in her dark hair and lines on her face that spoke of decades spent fighting battles no one else could see. The Veltari delegation sat at the highest platform, their scaled bodies gleaming under the artificial lights. High Arbiter Zalkathos, the oldest and most powerful of them all, watched her approach with the cold patience of a predator who had never known defeat. He had ruled the council for 3 centuries, and in all that time, no species had dared to challenge his authority. Ambassador Vasquez, his voice boomed through the hall, translated instantly into every language known to the galaxy. You stand before this council to answer for humanity's crimes against the integration mandate. Your species has refused to surrender your young for the betterment programs. This is not a request, it is the law. Elena stopped at the central podium, a small circle of light in an ocean of shadows. Around her, delegates from 12 elder species leaned forward in anticipation. They had seen this scene play out 100 times before. A young species would beg, would plead, would offer anything to avoid the punishment that was coming. It was always the same, but Elena did not beg. She looked up at Zalkathos with eyes that held no fear, only a quiet fire that made several nearby delegates shift uncomfortably in their seats. When she spoke, her voice was calm and clear, carrying to every corner of the massive chamber. For 300 years, humanity has obeyed your laws. We have paid your taxes. We have watched our colonies stripped of resources. We have bowed our heads and accepted our place at the bottom of your hierarchy. We did this because we believed that cooperation was the path to peace. She paused, and the silence that followed was so complete that even the ambient hum of the station seemed to fade away. But you have asked for something we will never give. You have demanded our children. Zalkathos made a sound that might have been laughter, a dry clicking noise that echoed through the hall. Your children will be educated, elevated, made better than the primitive creatures they would otherwise become. This is a gift we offer to lesser species. You should be grateful. Elena's expression did not change. Let me tell you what your gift really means. We have studied the integration programs. We know that the children who enter them never return to their families. We know that their memories are erased, their identities destroyed, their bodies modified to serve your purposes. You do not educate them. You erase them. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. No species had ever spoken to the High Arbiter this way. Guards began to move toward the podium, but Zalkathos raised one clawed hand to stop them. He was curious now, the way a child might be curious about an insect before crushing it. And what do you propose to do about it, little human? Will you run? Will you hide? There is nowhere in this galaxy beyond our reach. Elena reached into her coat and pulled out a small device. It was nothing more than a communication unit, standard issue for any ambassador. But when she pressed the button on its side, every screen in the Great Hall flickered to life. The delegates gasped. On every screen, they saw Earth. But it was not the Earth they knew from council records. It was not a quiet blue world of farmers and laborers. Instead, they saw ships, thousands of ships rising from hidden bases on every continent. They saw factories working at impossible speeds. They saw soldiers marching in formations that stretched to the horizon. 300 years ago, when we first made contact with the council, our leaders made a decision, Elena said, her voice rising above the chaos. They saw what you were. They saw how you treated the species beneath you. And they knew that one day you would come for something we could not surrender. She turned to face Zalkethos directly, and for the first time in his long life, the High Arbiter felt something he did not recognize. It was cold, and it started in his chest and spread outward to his limbs. Later, he would realize it was the first stirring of fear, so we prepared. While you counted our 47 registered ships, we built 47,000 more in secret. While you thought us weak and divided, we united every nation on our world under a single purpose. While you looked down on us as primitives, our scientists worked day and night on weapons your people cannot imagine. The screens changed again, showing detailed schematics of human warships, weapon systems, and battle strategies. The delegates stared in horror as they realized the truth. Humanity had not been sleeping for 3 centuries. They had been waiting. Humanity votes for war, Elena declared. Her voice ringing like a bell through the silent hall, Zalkethos stood slowly, his massive form casting a shadow over the entire chamber. You understand what this means. No species has declared war on the Council and survived. The Kreth Imperium tried, and we erased them so completely that their name exists only in our victory records. You are 1 species against 12. You have 1 world against 10,000. This is not courage. This is suicide. Elena smiled, and it was a cold, terrible thing that made even the bravest warriors in the room look away. The Kreth fought alone. They fought for conquest. They fought because they wanted power. We are not the Kreth. She walked toward the exit, her footsteps echoing in the stunned silence. At the doorway, she turned back one final time. We fight for our children. We fight for our future. And High Arbiter, you have made a mistake that your empire will not survive. What mistake is that? Zalkethos demanded, his voice shaking with rage. Elena's smile widened. You have never seen what humans do when they have nothing left to lose. You have never seen us fight for the ones we love. And now, you will learn a lesson that every enemy in our history has learned before you. What lesson? Never threaten a human's family. She walked out of the great hall, leaving behind 1,000 delegates in chaos and 1 High Arbiter who finally understood the cold feeling in his chest. It was fear, yes, but it was also something else. The first whisper of a truth he did not want to accept. The war had begun. And for the first time in 11,000 years, the Galactic Council did not know if they would win. News of humanity's declaration spread across the galaxy like fire through dry grass. Within hours, every species on every world had heard the story of the small human woman who stood before the most powerful beings in existence and told them she was coming for them. Most species laughed. In the pleasure halls of Veltharis Prime, wealthy nobles toasted to the coming entertainment. They placed bets on how long the human resistance would last. Some said weeks, others said days, and the most optimistic gave them perhaps a month before total annihilation. It would be amusing, they agreed, to watch another primitive species learn its place. The Velthari military command was less amused, but equally confident. Admiral Kethvern, a veteran of 100 campaigns against rebellious colonies, stood before a holographic map of human space and outlined his strategy to the High Arbiter. 300,000 ships, he announced, his scales rippling with pride. The largest fleet ever assembled in the history of the Council. We will arrive at their home system within 30 days. We will destroy their hidden fleet, burn their cities, and take their children as originally planned. The war will be over before it truly begins. Zalkethos nodded slowly, but the cold feeling in his chest had not faded since the human ambassador left the great hall. Something about her smile stayed with him, something about the certainty in her eyes. Send the fleet, he ordered, but also send our intelligence division. I want to know everything about these humans, their history, their culture, their weaknesses. Leave nothing unexamined. It was this order that would change everything. 3 days later, the first reports arrived on Zalkathos' desk. They were compiled by the best analysts in the galaxy, beings who had studied and cataloged thousands of species. What they found in humanity's past made them request additional verification, then additional verification again, because surely the records must be wrong. They were not wrong. The reports painted a picture that no one in the galaxy had ever seen before. Humanity had not spent its existence in peaceful cooperation like most intelligent species. They had spent it fighting, not against external enemies, but against each other. For their entire history, humans had waged war upon themselves with a creativity and brutality that defied imagination. The analysts discovered weapons called nuclear bombs that humans had invented, specifically to destroy their own cities. They found records of conflicts called world wars, where millions of humans killed each other over territory, resources, and ideas. They found evidence of chemical weapons, biological weapons, weapons designed to cause maximum suffering to other humans. They are insane, one analyst wrote in his report. No rational species would develop such tools of self-destruction. No rational species would survive developing them. Yet the humans not only survived, they thrived. Their population grew even as they killed each other. Their technology advanced even as they used it for war. They turned their own planet into a laboratory for violence. And they are still here. But the most disturbing discovery was not the weapons. It was the pattern every time humanity faced a threat. Whether from nature, disease, or each other, they responded not with fear, but with furious innovation. When a plague killed millions, they created vaccines within months. When their environment began to change, they built machines to adapt. When their enemies seemed unbeatable, they found new ways to fight, and they never, ever gave up. Admiral Kethvern dismissed the reports as exaggeration. These are records from a primitive world, he said confidently. They may have fought each other with sticks and stones, but they have never faced a true military power. Our ships are built with technology they cannot comprehend. Our soldiers are trained from birth for combat. What can these soft creatures possibly do against us? The intelligence chief, a cautious being named Veltorix, tried to warn him. Admiral, you do not understand. These creatures are not soft. They have simply never shown us their true nature. Look at their history. When their own governments threatened their families, they overthrew them. When their own planet tried to kill them, they conquered it. They have been preparing for a fight like this their entire existence. Preparing for what? Kethvern scoffed. For a war against something bigger than themselves. Everything they have ever done has been practice. Their civil wars, their technological races, their constant competition. It was all training. And now, for the first time in their history, they have a common enemy. They have united their entire species against a single target. Admiral, we are that target. Kethvern laughed. Let them unite. Let them prepare. 300,000 ships will crush them regardless of their determination. I will accept their surrender within 60 days. But as the Valkyrie Armada launched from its home ports, something strange began happening across human space. Earth went dark. All communication ceased. All diplomatic channels closed. All trade routes were abandoned. The 47 registered human ships that the Council had tracked for centuries simply vanished from their sensors. It was as if the entire species had disappeared. Some analysts suggested the humans had fled to hide in the outer reaches of the galaxy. Others proposed that they had surrendered in secret and were waiting to negotiate. The truth was far more terrifying in the factories of Detroit and Shanghai and Berlin. Workers labored in shifts that would kill any other species. They slept for 4 hours, worked for 20, and called it normal. Production lines that once made vehicles and electronics now produced weapons and armor at rates that broke every record in human history. In the laboratories of MIT and Cambridge and Tokyo, scientists made breakthroughs that should have taken decades. They cracked problems in physics and engineering that the Council had struggled with for centuries. They did this not because they were smarter, but because they had no time to fail. Every setback was met not with despair, but with stubborn determination to find another way. In the asteroid belt and the moons of Jupiter and Saturn, construction drones worked around the clock on projects that had been planned for 300 years. Shipyards hidden in the cold darkness of space assembled fleets from materials mined in secret. Weapons platforms rose from beneath the ice of Europa and the storms of Neptune. And everywhere in homes and schools and military bases humans trained. They trained their children to survive. They trained their elders to fight. They trained their artists and musicians and poets to carry the memory of humanity in case the worst should happen. They prepared not just for victory, but for the possibility of defeat, because humans had learned long ago that hope and preparation must walk together. On the last day before the Valkyrie Armada arrived, Fleet Admiral James Okonkwo stood on the bridge of the carrier Unity and addressed his forces. 300 years ago, our ancestors met the galaxy and chose to smile and bow and wait. They knew this day would come. They built everything we have now so that we could stand here in this moment and defend our home. The enemy thinks we are weak because we chose peace. They think we are primitive because we do not conquer. Today, we show them what humanity truly is. He paused, looking out at the 1,000 screens showing faces from every continent, every station, every hidden base. We are not a species that surrenders. We are not a species that forgets. We are the children of 10,000 wars fought against ourselves, and we survived every single one. Now we face our first war against an outside enemy. And I promise you this, his voice rose, carrying across the void of space to every human heart. They will remember this day forever. They will tell stories of what happened here to their children and their children's children. And those stories will all end the same way, with the warning that echoes through every corner of our history. He smiled. And it was the same cold smile that Elena Vasquez had shown in the Great Hall. Never start a war with humanity. You will not like how it ends. The Valkyrie Armada appeared on long-range sensors 1 hour later. 300,000 ships blotting out the stars like an endless swarm. They expected fear. They expected surrender. They expected the quick victory that Admiral Kethvern had promised. They found something else entirely. Admiral Kethvern stood on the command deck of his flagship, the Eternal Dominion, and watched Earth grow larger on the view screen. It was a beautiful world. He admitted blue oceans, green continents, white clouds swirling in patterns that reminded him of the pleasure gardens back home. Soon it would burn, and that beauty would become a warning to every species in the galaxy. "Status report," he demanded, his voice sharp with anticipation. "All 300,000 ships in formation, Admiral. We have complete sensor coverage of the system. No human vessels detected. Their defense platforms appear to be offline. It seems they have accepted the inevitable." Kethvern allowed himself a rare smile. The intelligence reports were exaggerated after all. These humans are no different from any other conquered species, full of bluster until they see real power. Open a communication channel. I will accept their surrender personally. The channel opened, but no response came. Earth remained silent, its surface dark except for the natural lights of cities that seemed strangely dim. The moon hung in its orbit, like a pale witness to what was about to happen. They do not respond, Admiral. Then they choose death. Fire the first bombardment wave. Target their major population centers. Let them see what defiance costs. 2,000 ships move forward, their weapons charging with enough energy to crack continents. The crews aboard them felt no guilt, no hesitation. This was what they had been trained for. This was their purpose. They had done it 100 times before to 100 species who thought they could resist the Council. The weapons fired, and then the universe went mad from the asteroid belt came the first surprise. Thousands of projectiles moving at speeds that the Valkyrie sensors barely registered. They were simple things, just rocks wrapped in metal and launched by electromagnetic rails hidden among the tumbling debris. But they moved so fast that they hit the bombardment fleet before anyone could react. 40 ships vanished in the first second. Not destroyed in the traditional sense, but simply erased. Their hulls punched through by kinetic force that no shield could stop. The commanders of the surviving vessels screamed for orders as more projectiles came. An endless rain of death from the darkness between planets. "What is happening?" Kefvern roared, gripping his command chair as his view screen filled with explosion after explosion before anyone could answer. The second surprise arrived from beneath the ice of Europa, from the frozen methane lakes of Titan. From the swirling storms of Jupiter's atmosphere, human ships rose like ghosts awakening from ancient graves. They were not the elegant vessels of the Council, built for intimidation and ceremony. They were brutal things, all sharp angles and heavy armor, designed for one purpose, only to kill 47,000 contacts. The sensor officer screamed, his voice breaking with terror. They were hiding in the gas giants and the ice moons. "We never detected them. Our scans showed nothing." "That is impossible," Kefvern snarled. "No species can hide that many ships from Council sensors." But the humans had done exactly that. For 300 years, they had built their fleet in the places no one thought to look. They had developed stealth technology that the Council considered theoretical. They had prepared for this exact moment while smiling and bowing and pretending to be harmless. The human fleet did not charge forward in the disorganized rush that primitive species typically displayed. They moved with precision that spoke of decades of planning, each ship knowing exactly where it needed to be and what it needed to do. They split into hundreds of smaller groups that darted between the Valkyrie formations like wolves among sheep. And then there were the pilots. Kefvern had fought against many species, and he knew how beings reacted in combat. They were cautious, they were careful, they valued their lives above their missions. But these human pilots flew their ships as if death was simply not a consideration. They rammed damaged vessels into enemy cruisers. They flew into kill zones that no sane being would enter. They laughed on open channels as they traded their lives for victory. "They are insane," his tactical officer whispered, watching a human fighter crash directly into the bridge of a Valkyrie destroyer. "They welcome death." "No," Kefvern said slowly, finally understanding the cold feeling that the High Arbiter had described. "They do not welcome death. They simply fear losing more than they fear dying. We threatened their children. We gave them something to fight for. We made them desperate, and desperate humans, he now realized, were the most dangerous things in the universe. The battle raged for hours, then days. The Valkyrie advantage in numbers meant nothing against human tactics. Every time they gathered their ships for a concentrated attack, human missiles would arrive from unexpected angles. Every time they tried to retreat and regroup, human hunter-killer packs would chase them down. The Council fleet was built for overwhelming force against inferior enemies. But these enemies were not inferior, they were just very, very angry on the fourth day. The humans deployed their ground forces. Dropships descended on Mars colony, carrying soldiers who had trained their entire lives for this moment. The Valkyrie garrison there numbered 50,000. Elite troops, equipped with the finest weapons the Council could provide. They expected the human soldiers to be soft, undisciplined, easy to break. They were wrong. The first wave of humans hit the ground already firing. They moved through the colony corridors with a speed and coordination that seemed almost supernatural. They communicated in hand signals and grunts, needing no words to know what their squad mates were thinking. They had fought beside each other for years, and they trusted each other more than they trusted themselves. But what broke the Velthari spirit was not the human skill. It was the human attitude. They smiled in the middle of combat. Surrounded by death and destruction, human soldiers smiled at each other. They made jokes. They laughed when enemies fell. They cheered when their friends accomplished difficult objectives. It was as if the entire war was some kind of game to them, a challenge to be enjoyed rather than survived. "What are you?" a Velthari commander demanded as human soldiers surrounded his position. His troops had surrendered, their weapons thrown down, their spirits crushed by enemies who seemed to find joy in battle. The human sergeant leading the squad tilted her head and considered the question. "We are what happens when you threaten our families," she said simply. "We are what you should have left alone." On the 11th day, the Battle of Seoul ended. 200,000 Velthari ships had been destroyed. Another 50,000 had been captured. The remaining 50,000 fled toward home space, their crews broadcasting desperate messages to anyone who would listen. Admiral Cathvern was among the survivors. He had watched his flagship burn around him, had been pulled from the wreckage by human soldiers who treated him with a strange kind of respect even as they bound his hands. Now he sat in a holding cell on a human station, waiting to learn his fate. A human officer came to see him, a young man with tired eyes and blood still staining his uniform. "Your fleet has retreated," he said. "The war is not over, but this battle is. Your High Arbiter is demanding your return in exchange for human prisoners. We are considering his offer. Why are you telling me this? Because I want you to understand something. We did not want this war. We spent 300 years hoping it would never come. We built our weapons in secret and prayed we would never use them. Your people forced us to fight by threatening our children." Cathvern said nothing. "There was nothing to say. When you return to your council," the young officer continued, "tell them what you saw here. Tell them that humanity is not weak. Tell them that we will not stop until our children are safe and our freedom is secure. Tell them that this was just the beginning." He turned to leave, then paused at the door, "and tell them that if they want peace, they know where to find us. If they want war, they know where to find us for that too. The choice is theirs." The message Cathvern sent to the council was simple, but it changed everything. It spread across 10,000 worlds and made species who had never heard of Earth suddenly very interested in these strange creatures called humans. It made the High Arbiter realize that 11,000 years of dominance might be coming to an end. The message was only one sentence, but it carried the weight of 200,000 destroyed ships and the death of Council invincibility. They do not stop. They do not fear death, and they are coming for us all. Fleet Admiral James Okonkwo stood before a holographic map of the galaxy, its countless stars glowing like scattered diamonds against the darkness. Red markers showed Council-controlled space, stretching across 10,000 systems in an empire that had seemed eternal just months ago. Blue markers showed human territory, a tiny cluster of lights near the edge that now pulsed with defiant energy. "The Council expects us to stop," he said to the assembled commanders. "They believe we will be satisfied with defending our home. They think we will wait behind our borders while they rebuild their fleets and plan their next attack. They are wrong." General Sarah Chun leaned forward, her scarred face showing nothing but grim determination. "What do you propose, Admiral? We do not wait. We do not defend. We advance." For 300 years, the Council has treated every species in this galaxy as slaves or servants. They have stripped colonies of resources, stolen children for their integration programs, and crushed any resistance with overwhelming force. Today, that changes. He touched the map, and dozens of new markers appeared, yellow lights scattered throughout Council space, each one representing a species that had suffered under galactic rule. These are the broken. That is what the Council calls the species they have conquered. The Thrall, whose homeworld was burned for refusing tribute. The Kasari, whose population was halved by biological weapons. The Sindari, whose children were taken generation after generation until their culture nearly died. Dozens of species, billions of beings, all of them waiting for someone to stand up and say, "Enough. You want to recruit them," Chum said, understanding dawning in her eyes. "I want to free them. We do not conquer. That makes us no better than the Council. We liberate. We give them weapons, training, and something they have not had in centuries, hope. And then we ask one simple question." "What question?" Okonkwo smiled. "Will you stand with us?" The campaign began 3 weeks later. The first target was Thrall Prime, a world the Council had turned into a massive mining operation after burning its cities and killing 90% of its population. The surviving Thrall worked in underground tunnels, extracting precious metals for masters they had learned to hate. Council guards watched them constantly, ready to execute anyone who showed signs of resistance. The human fleet arrived without warning. They dropped from hyperspace directly above the planet and immediately engaged the orbital defense platforms. Within hours, the Council forces were destroyed or fleeing, and human dropships were landing in the mining districts. The Thrall workers expected death. Every time a new master came, it meant more suffering. They huddled in their tunnels and waited for the inevitable. Instead, they heard a voice on the communication system, a human voice, translated into their language, "People of Thrall, we are not here to conquer you. We are not here to replace your old masters with new ones. We are here because the Council threatened our children, just as they destroyed yours. We are here to give you a choice." The voice paused, and in that pause, thousands of Thrall held their breath. "You can remain as you are, slaves working for masters who see you as tools. Or you can stand with us and fight for your freedom. We will give you weapons. We will train you. We will treat you as equals, not subjects. And when this war is over, your world will be yours again." The response was immediate and overwhelming. Thrall workers who had never held a weapon volunteered by the thousands. Elders who remembered the time before Council rule wept openly. Children who had never known freedom looked up at the human soldiers with wonder in their eyes. "Why do you do this?" One Thrall leader asked Okonkwo when they finally met. "Why risk your lives for species you have never known?" Okonkwo considered the question carefully before answering. "Because we know what it is like to fight for survival. Because we have seen what happens when one group decides they are superior to all others. Because our history taught us that freedom is not free. It must be won and defended by those who believe in it." He placed his hand on the Thrall leader's shoulder. "And because we are humans. We are stubborn, and we are angry, and we do not leave allies behind." The pattern repeated across the galaxy. System by system, the human fleet advanced. But they did not burn and conquer, they liberated and recruited. The Tasari joined after human doctors cured a plague the Council had deliberately spread to control their population. The Sindari joined after human soldiers helped them recover children from an integration facility. The first time in generations that families had been reunited, each liberated species brought more soldiers, more ships, more resources. Each victory weakened the Council and strengthened the growing alliance. What had started as one species against 12 became 47 species united under a single banner, the United Terran Alliance. A name that now included far more than just Terrans. The Council watched in horror as their empire crumbled. High Arbiter Zalcathos summoned his remaining advisors to an emergency session. The chamber that had once held 1,000 confident delegates now felt cold and empty. News of defeats arrived faster than anyone could process. Species that had been loyal for millennia were suddenly rising up against their masters. The integration programs had been shut down across 100 worlds by local rebellions. How is this happening? Zalcathos demanded, his voice cracking with rage and fear. We ruled this galaxy for 11,000 years. We crushed every rebellion. We destroyed every enemy. How can one species undo everything we built? His intelligence chief, Veltorix, stood slowly. He was older now, and the weight of his failures pressed down on him like physical burden. Because they offer something we never did, High Arbiter. They offer respect. They offer equality. They offer a future where species are partners, not slaves. That is weakness, Zalcathos snarled. The strong rule the weak. That is the natural order. Is it? Veltorix asked quietly. Look at what they have built in 2 years. Look at the alliance that marched toward us. 47 species united not by fear but by belief. That is not weakness. That is strength we never understood. The High Arbiter fell silent, unable to argue against the evidence before him. Meanwhile, in the liberated territories, something remarkable was happening. Species that had been enemies for centuries were working together. Thrall engineers collaborated with Kasari scientists. Sindari warriors trained alongside human soldiers. Differences that the Council had exploited to maintain control were being set aside in pursuit of a common goal. Admiral Okonkwo watched these alliances form with quiet satisfaction. This was what he had hoped for, not just victory in war, but the foundation of something better. The Council had ruled through division, keeping species suspicious of each other so they could never unite. Humanity was proving that another way was possible. Some of my officers are concerned, General Chun said to him one evening as they reviewed battle plans. They worry that when the war ends, these alliances will fall apart. They think the old hatreds will return. Okonkwo shook his head. The hatreds were never real. The Council created them, encouraged them, used them. Without that poison, species discover they have more in common than they have different. We all want our children to be safe. We all want our futures to be free. That is enough to build on. And if it is not, then we try harder. We show by example what cooperation looks like. We make mistakes and learn from them. We keep pushing until the galaxy we want to see becomes the galaxy we live in. It is the human way. Chun considered this for a moment. You really believe we can change everything? I believe we have to try. 11,000 years of tyranny is enough. It is time for something new. 3 months later, the United Terran Alliance fleet, now numbering over 100,000 ships, crewed by members of 47 species, jumped into the Nexus system. Ahead of them lay Nexus Prime, the seat of Council power, the symbol of an empire that had dominated the galaxy since before humanity discovered fire. The final battle was about to begin. The sky above Nexus Prime had never known fear. For 11,000 years, the great crystal towers of the Council homeworld had stood as symbols of absolute power. Ships from conquered worlds brought tribute to its ports. Delegates from subject species bowed in its halls. The very stars seemed to shine brighter here, as if the universe itself acknowledged the supremacy of this place. But on this day, the sky filled with shadows, 100,000 ships of the United Terran Alliance emerged from hyperspace in a single coordinated jump, their formation blocking out the light of distant stars. They represented 47 species who had chosen to stand together, 47 peoples who had suffered under Council rule and now demanded justice. At the center of the fleet, the carrier Unity flew the banner of the Alliance, a single hand reaching upward. Grasping a star, High Arbiter, Zalcathos watched from his observation deck as his remaining defenders scrambled to form a defensive perimeter. There were perhaps 30,000 ships left in the Council fleet, veterans of a dozen failed counteroffensives. They were brave beings who still believed in the cause they served, but even they could see the truth written in the endless ranks of enemy vessels. We are outnumbered, his military advisor said quietly, and outmaneuvered. Our allies have abandoned us. Our subject species have rebelled. There is no path to victory here. I am aware, Zalcathos replied, his voice hollow. Summon the council delegates. If this is the end of our empire, we will face it with dignity. The great hall felt different now. The 1,000 delegates who had once filled its seats had dwindled to fewer than 100. Most had fled to distant colonies or been overthrown by their own populations. Those who remained were the true believers, the ones who could not imagine a galaxy without council rule. They watched in silence as Ambassador Elena Vasquez appeared on the main view screen. She looked older than she had 3 years ago, when she first stood in this chamber and declared war. Her hair was fully gray now, and new lines marked her face. But her eyes still held that same quiet fire, that same unbreakable determination. High Arbiter Zalcathos, she said, her voice carrying across the vast chamber. 3 years ago, I stood where you are sitting and told you that humanity would fight for its children. I told you that you had made a mistake. Today, we have come to collect the consequences of that mistake. Zalcathos rose slowly, his ancient body protesting the movement. You have won, Ambassador. I see that clearly. So I ask you, what happens now? What do you intend to do with us? The question hung in the air like a held breath. Across the galaxy, billions of beings watched this conversation, waiting to see if the humans would prove to be just another conqueror. The council had ruled through genocide and terror. Would their replacements be any different? Elena paused, and in that pause, the fate of civilizations balanced on the edge of a knife. When we planned this war, she finally said, many of my advisors recommended that we destroy the council completely. They pointed to your history, the species you erased, the worlds you burned, the children you stole. They argued that beings who could do such things did not deserve to survive. The council delegates shifted uncomfortably. They knew their history better than anyone, but that is not the human way. We have seen what happens when victors treat the defeated as less than beings. We have lived through cycles of revenge that lasted generations. We know that true peace cannot be built on graves. She leaned forward, her face filling the screen. So here is what happens now. The Galactic Council is dissolved. Your empire ends today. Every species that you ruled will be free to determine its own destiny. The integration programs end immediately, and every child in those facilities will be returned to their families. And us? Zalcathos asked. What becomes of the council species? You get exactly what you gave others, except we will be more generous than you ever were. You get one seat at the new table, one voice among equals. You will follow the same laws you enforced on others. You will help rebuild what you destroyed. You will learn to be partners instead of masters. A murmur ran through the chamber. This was not the genocide they had expected. This was not the revenge they had feared. This was something else entirely, something that felt like both mercy and challenge. You would trust us? Zalcathos asked, genuinely confused. After everything we have done, trust must be earned, Elena replied. And you have much to atone for. But we believe that beings can change. We believe that species can grow beyond their past. We have to believe this, because if we did not, there would be no point in fighting for a better future. She smiled, and for the first time, it was not the cold, terrible smile of a warrior facing enemies. It was the warm, tired smile of someone who had carried a heavy burden for a very long time and could finally set it down. High Arbiter, you asked me once what lesson humanity would teach you. Do you remember? I remember. You said we would learn what happens when you threaten a human's family. That was the first lesson. Here is the second. The measure of a species is not how well they dominate. It is how well they lift others up. We could have destroyed you. We could have taken everything you have and called it justice. Instead, we offer you a hand. Take it or not, but know that the offer is genuine. Zalkethos stood in silence for a long moment, feeling the weight of 11,000 years pressing down on him. He thought of all the species his people had crushed, all the worlds they had burned, all the futures they had stolen. He thought of the humans who had defeated him not through cruelty, but through something he was only beginning to understand. He thought of the children in the integration facilities, waiting to be returned to parents they had been forced to forget, slowly, carefully. He bowed his head, the first time in his 300-year life that he had bowed to anyone. The Galactic Council accepts your terms. We will join your alliance. We will help rebuild what we destroyed. And we will try to become the partners you believe we can be. Elena nodded. Then let this moment mark the end of one era and the beginning of another. No more empires. No more masters and slaves. Just peoples working together toward a future where every species can thrive. She reached out toward the screen. Her hand open. Welcome to the Galactic Compact. The broadcast ended. But the moment echoed across 10,000 worlds. Species that had been enemies watched each other with new eyes. Leaders who had plotted war began to consider peace. Children who had grown up under council rule suddenly saw possibilities their parents had never imagined. 3 days later, the treaty was signed in the rebuilt Great Hall of Nexus Prime. Representatives of 48 species, including the former council members, added their marks to a document that guaranteed freedom, equality, and cooperation. It was not perfect. It could not undo the pain of the past. But it was a beginning. Admiral James Okonkwo stood at the back of the chamber, watching the ceremony with quiet pride. General Chun stood beside him, her scarred face softened by something that might have been hope. Do you think it will last? She asked. Nothing lasts forever, Okonkwo replied. But this can last long enough to change things. We have planted a seed. Now we must tend it. That is the work of generations, not days. And if the old hatreds return, then we remind each other why we fought. We tell stories of this day to our children and their children. We make sure the galaxy never forgets what happens when beings choose cooperation over domination. Ambassador Vasquez joined them as the ceremony concluded. She looked exhausted but satisfied, like a gardener who had finally brought a long-planned project to bloom. It is strange, she said softly. 3 years ago, I stood in this hall and declared war. Today, I signed a peace treaty in the same place. I expected the war to end us. I never imagined it would lead to this. You showed them a different way, Okonkwo said. You showed them that strength and mercy can exist together. You showed them what humanity truly is. What are we, Admiral? He considered the question carefully before answering. We are stubborn. We are loyal. We fight fiercely and forgive generously. We make mistakes and learn from them. We dream of better things and then build them. We are humans, and apparently, that is exactly what the galaxy needed. Vasquez laughed a genuine, warm sound that seemed almost out of place in these solemn halls. Remind me to include that in my memoirs. Decades later, a Velthari historian would write about this period in a book that became required reading across the compact. The passage that students remembered most went like this. We thought humanity was weak because they cooperated. We thought them foolish because they showed mercy. We were wrong. They were the first species to understand that true strength is not the capacity for destruction. It is the will to use it only when necessary, and the wisdom to stop when the battle is won. They taught us that an enemy defeated can become an ally. They showed us that the hand extended in peace is mightier than the fist raised in war. And they left us with a warning that echoes through every generation since. The warning was simple. The warning was eternal. The warning was carved into monuments on 1,000 worlds and taught to children of 100 species. Never threaten a human's family, but if you must face them in battle, pray that they offer you mercy. Because if they do, It means you have a chance to become something better than you were.